Okay, so welcome everybody for another kind of podcast of Academia Liberamentis, where we talk to some of the core people making up ALM, what their own motivations and histories were. And today I'm very happy to be joined by Dr. David Bell, MDB something. They have a weird acronym in Australia for what is basically a medical doctor. Um,
MBBS. Yeah.
can you briefly introduce yourself, David?
Okay, Paul. Yeah. So I'm as you said, a physician, public health and internal physician. Worked in Australia, the UK, now live in the US in Texas. Worked in clinical medicine and then in public health in the World Health Organization for FIND, which is a foundation in Geneva, and for Gates in his lab in near Seattle in sort of product development, etc. for for a few years. And at the moment, I'm in Texas and working for myself, sort of consulting for various biotech companies and global health groups and so on.
Right,
Yeah.
right. And ALM is really lucky to have David as one of its health teachers and you know all round knowledgeable about international relations because you've also worked with and for the UN, as I understand it,
Mm.
and are quite familiar with that world.
Yeah, so I worked with and for the WHO and with on the funding side and the recipient side, and based in the Philippines and some other countries of relevance. So
Uh,
yeah, I,
But back in the days when the WHO was still a good organization. I want to talk about those are my words, not yours, David.
there's bits of it. There's bits of it that are, bits of it that aren't. The aren't bits have become more prominent than the are bits, perhaps. Yeah.
Today I sort of want to cover education and what is good or wrong about it in our Western countries, and I like to personalize. So I happen to know that David, at the start of the pandemic, moved his family to Texas and became a homeschooler. Those are big choices. I think most people don't dare to make such choices. They look at what may be going wrong, they may be unhappy with it, but at the end of the day, they suck it up. You did not. Tell me, what was the situation? What made you choose this? And what were the
Okay.
problems you saw?
Yeah, so we were in Washington State for the first 2 years of the pandemic, actually. So we moved in 2022. And it was for a number of reasons. We had two young children then, born in, what was it? Can't remember when they were born. They were about 2 and 4 at that stage. Um, and we, it was very strange in Washington State, which is, we were on near Seattle, on the outskirts of Seattle, and it was very much wear a mask and walk on the other side of the street from anyone else sort of stuff. And we weren't really part of that. So we tried to live normally, but we had people screaming at our kids and abusing them and abusing, my wife, etc., for, not wearing a mask out in the park in the wind and rain and that sort of thing. But we eventually, we moved for a number of reasons. One was just the weather. And the Washington State's fantastic in the summer, but the winters drag, especially where we were. It's wet, cloudy, grey for months on end. And we're both from warmer places, and so that was part of it. But largely, we wanted to go somewhere where we felt people were a little bit more able to think for themselves and not just blindly follow government dictates. And we thought that they were going to probably um, mandate the mRNA vaccines for COVID for children, which they eventually didn't, but we thought they were going to. But also the other concern that there was the sort of strange gender stuff which goes on in some parts of the West, and they were going to bring in and did laws which make it illegal for a parent to intervene, even to the extent of suggesting they wait a little while and think about it. If, for instance, your daughter tells the school that she feels like she's a boy, and the school recommends having her breast cut off, and so it's illegal now for a parent to say maybe you should wait a few months. So in Washington State and about three others in the US. So we don't agree with that. We don't agree that the state should be the parent. We think parents should be the parent. So we wanted to move out of Washington, and Texas was warmer than some of the alternatives, which have long, cold winters. So we ended up in Texas, having never been here before. And so we found a house on the edge of a small town with a few acres. We did have goats. We now have sheep and chickens, geese, that sort of thing. So putting in fruit trees. So we eat majority of our own food, but it's a lot of work, and I wouldn't say it's sustainable, but we know what we're eating, and it's sort of fun for us and the kids. But then, yeah, schooling. So it's a number of reasons why we're homeschooling, and a large one is that my wife is able to put the time in. And, so a lot of people we know would love to homeschool and can't because both parents are working. So it is quite a bit of work, but not as much as you'd think. And Texas is very easy to homeschool. You just don't send your kids to school. And after a while, the school stops sending text messages to remind you, and therefore you're homeschooling. And things like the zoo in Houston and the local library and so on are all set up for homeschooling. So there's a lot to do with that. We have a school sports, which is all the homeschoolers turn up and compete against each other. So there's a lot that goes on. There's still, I think, 25% of local children are homeschooled here. So it's a big thing. But we did send our son for 1 year to school, for his first year. And, that was pretty good. But the school was sort of reasonable for a Texas school. But we found he spent, he was out the door at before 8. He had to be there at about 8. And then he finished there at about 4. And so we didn't see much at all. And he didn't seem to be learning that much at school. He could already read when he went, and he was reading Harry Potter, and they were sending him home with books that had 4 words per page, and so. And we realized most of the time there was spent lining up and waiting for other people, and he was constantly getting into trouble because he was talking too much and that sort of thing. So, which I think you've met him, Paul, so you know what I'm talking about. And so we thought we'd keep him home the second year and try homeschooling. And our daughter now is homeschooled as well. She's younger, and they spend, I guess, 2 or 3 hours most mornings. They do maths, they do reading, English, or whatever, and they sort of explore what they're interested in. So, Egyptology or cosmology, black holes or whatever, and stuff they'd never really get to at school. And they can follow that, they're good readers, they can follow that themselves. So we don't follow a very strict curriculum, but they, except for maths really, but they are a long way ahead of the year, which I think is common to most homeschool kids here. And I think that is because although they spend much less time in formal learning, the time that they do spend is much, much more productive because they're not waiting for other kids or standing in the corridor in line, sitting waiting for the teacher to come. So, um, but the other thing, I mean, he was constantly getting into trouble because he talks and because he's a boy, a young human boy,
Hmm.
stuck in an institution that looks like a prison and is
Hmm.
run very much like a prison, and is completely unsuitable for young humans, especially young human males.
Hmm.
So, we have another friend here who, for instance, their kid is at a school where, and it's not unusual, you're not allowed to talk in the corridor. You have to walk in single file with your hands behind your back. And you're not allowed to run the playground because it could be dangerous because you could fall over. So, this is sort of prison stuff. You do this and you see prisoners doing that at Guantanamo or something, but you don't. This is the way that schools are run here. And schools in Texas and a lot of America are very, very big. So it's not a small community. It's where the teachers know all the kids, sort of thing. It's many hundreds of kids, perhaps a couple of thousand, in a school, which is a huge concrete or brick building with very few windows and almost nothing around it because of this fear of security, etc. here. So they sort of look like prisons and they're run very much like prisons. And the end result, presumably, is what they aim to do in a prison, which is regiment the children.
Hmm.
So, we have a friend whose kid has just been started on Ritalin for ADHD. That, 30–40% of children in America now are on medications. And I suspect that a lot of this is because they're normal human children being forced into an abnormal
Hmm.
environment. We have sheep, we've had goats and so on, and the young ones just run around and jump on each other
Hmm.
and do all the things you get into trouble for at school as a human. But which we used to do when I was a kid. We had very,
Hmm.
almost quite violent games in the playground, but everyone enjoyed them. You got the odd broken arm or something, but it was humans were learning to, test their limits and understand risk and understand what they're capable of and gain confidence and all those things, which seem to be excluded now from the education system here. So yeah, so we're homeschooling partly because it was easier and we see more of our kids, but largely I think because we feel it is a much more appropriate way for a young human to live.
Look, it's very inspiring, and if I can pick up a few of those things. I mean, did you have jobs in Washington State? Did you have to give up a lot, or was it, well,
Eh,
you're only there for a
Um,
while?
yeah, I
Um,
had a job, half-time job, which was in Oregon at a company. So that continued for a while here, but now I'm just consulting. But most of my work was consulting, and so I'm very fortunate in that way
mm,
because I and my wife consults also, so we work remotely. Half my work at the moment is with the University of Leeds in the UK, and I work for a couple of companies in Canada with some old groups in the US and in Europe. And because of the nature of my work, it doesn't matter where I am. So, and I travel a lot. There's not too far to Houston Airport from here. So yeah, I'm very fortunate that we did have that choice. We know other people who don't have that choice. And
mhm,
one group friends of ours who also came to Texas at about the same time, and he's now had to give up his job because the employer, there was a time when everyone was working from home. The employer now says they will have to be back in the office, and that would mean
mhm.
moving back to Washington State. So he hasn't got a job at the moment. So, and his wife had to give up a job when she left. So yeah, we are very lucky. As I said, because being at home, working from home also means you can, it's easier to homeschool. Um,
Mm.
and so a lot of
And
people, it's not
that's
a
the second
choice.
thing I wanted to talk about. So, I mean, okay, you were lucky you didn't, presumably you were only there for 2 years, so you didn't have too many friends to give up, and your kids
Oh
are what, two
no,
and
I was
four, you
there
said.
for no, I was there for 10 years. Yeah.
Ooh, okay.
In
So
Washington. Yeah.
there was a
Yeah.
local network you lose
Yeah.
in a certain sense, which is a pity
Uh,
always. You're always
we did, although we
right.
have much more of a network here, and that is mainly because the people are very different. Um,
Mm,
People are much more open. It's true. I mean, it's not a criticism of anywhere, but they are
mm,
much more open in Texas. So people talk more in the street. They talk more to their neighbors, and so we had a network there because we both initially employed at a company in an office, but I was working from home at the end. But um, so we had people we knew from our work and a few others, but
hmm
the network is much bigger here in Texas, and it's more the way the community thinks, I think. And there's a lot of because a lot of people homeschool, you inevitably end up in a network of other people who are
mm.
homeschooling because the kids get together.
Yeah, 25% is a lot. That's one in four, which means you can share
Yeah,
activities, share
yeah,
particular teachers on maybe languages, which,
yeah,
neither you nor your wife can give that kind of thing. But I wanted to ask on that because you mentioned how what I would say woke was a problem in Washington State. It's less in Texas, but still in Texas, you describe it as a mass prison system with thousands. But also,
yeah.
it smells like safetyism, right? Something we see in mainstream
Mm,
universities, we see in education everywhere. This notion that, oh, the kids must be kept extremely safe for them to learn anything.
mm,
Whereas I'm with you, they need to be challenged. They need to experience some
yes.
risks of real life. Now, of course, not to their huge demise, but that's right. They need to sprain something, and now they need to break
Mm,
something. That's how they learn, and
mm.
also in a social, emotional sense. Now, what is your idea as to where's this coming from, even in Texas? Why this safetyism? What, where's that come from?
Yeah,
This is the
I
Lone Star
really,
State.
yeah, it is, but it's not necessarily run that way. So the people are different here. I'm not sure the government is. Um, and yeah, it's hard to know why. A woman is, long life, but within Texas was arrested not that long ago in front of her children and handcuffed in front of her children for allowing her, I think it was like 8 or 9 year old, to walk 4 blocks home on a street they'd walked many times. And one of the neighbors saw them walking past and called the police, and the police came and said, Your child is too young to walk in the street on their own," and arrested her. So that goes on here and all over the place. It's I used to walk to. I actually, I mean, I was in a small town and sort of everyone knew each other when I grew up, but I used to go out at the age of 2 on my own, and in the street, I used, down to the railway station to watch the trains. I still remember, and I walked to kindergarten to preschool at the age of about 3.5 with a friend, several blocks and back each day.
Mhm,
And but it's hard to know whether it is more dangerous now or whether it is just in the news all the time. So people know, in Texas, the Uvalde school shooting was terrible and a lot of kids were killed. But that was a school in Texas of thousands, I guess, and happened once. And it doesn't, detract from the tragedy, but it is also a tragedy if every kid then loses an important part of their childhood because of that. The big news at the moment is the shootings in the US, is the shootings at Brown University, where 2 students were
mhm.
killed, as you might have seen 3 days ago. But this is dominating the news, and it is one of hundreds of universities, and it's just too, it's just too, it is,
Mhm.
it's 2 students were killed, but um, you could see a huge pressure in the media that because they haven't yet identified the assailant, the murderer, because there are not enough security cameras and the doors weren't locked and there weren't enough security guards. So you can see how it happens. And yeah, there are always idiots in the world, and we're always going to suffer from idiots and psychopaths and mad people. But there's also the issues around quality of life. And do you want to have Brown University or US universities to essentially be prisons
mm,
where, only certain people are allowed in certain parts? You have to have a digital
hmm
pass to get into the door. The university can track where everyone is at every moment, facial
hmm
recognition, all the rest of it. All this stuff they're calling for suddenly
mm,
because after 3 days they haven't been able to find the person who did it. And I think that's what is happening. People will say, yeah, digital ID is terrible, but then the same people are criticizing the government for not not detaining the person who did the shooting after 3 days. And
mm.
I
And
think,
at such moments, it's the default, right? That is in people's
yeah,
mind. The default is, oh, surveillance, passes, a prison system is safe, and furthermore, it's sort of pleasant, right? Because
yeah,
that prison environment is not seen as a negation of humanity. It's not seen as, well, you don't have a life then. No, it's sort of seen as, well, that's not so bad then, right? You're somewhere, you have food, you live, but
yeah,
what kind of life is that? It's at that moment people's defaults reveal themselves. Close to home is safe. And I know
mm,
people, and I don't know whether you agree with them. I'm not sure I agree with them, who basically say, look, this is a form of feminization of society. 100 years ago, the answer would have been,
mm,
well, other people should have had guns so that they could shoot back. Or, well, we need to train
mm,
kids younger to look after themselves and look after their friends. And so the default would have been different. It would have been, look, a community will deal with this, not a government
yeah.
and a security firm. What do you think?
No, I agree. It's the default that the government should do more all the time. Um,
Hmm
And with all the evidence that we have that governments are becoming less and less accountable to the people, and
hmm
it's partly because they're not unrelated, I think, because the bigger the government gets,
hmm
and the more it is expected to run day-to-day life, the less accountable it probably becomes. So yeah, I'm just sort of thinking on the thread there, but
So I think I agree where you were going. Is this notion that if a government puts itself forward as daddy, to a certain extent, the population and mummy, the population is going to say, oh, but daddy, why did you let this happen? Why don't you also
yeah,
do that? So people start to become helpless and act
but
like
yeah.
children towards the government.
There is, but I mean, there's also a reason behind it, which is what I'm thinking that you know, pe it's hard to say what it is, but people expect not to be hurt in any way, and
Hmm
that it's not just the government protecting them. This whole idea of safe spaces,
hmm
the idea, hate speech, etc., etc. This idea that you cannot make me feel uncomfortable.
Mm.
Um,
So even in Texas,
It's not so much in Texas. That's something that isn't so prevalent here, but in society in general.
okay.
So yeah, I think, yeah, whether that's feminization or I think it's a bit rude
hmm
to women. But
No, I've heard people
it's
who
sort
say
of
this is because
a,
of the estrogen in the water, right? Plastics in the water. They blame
yeah.
that, right? They don't blame women. They blame something chemical.
Well, that's not completely unreasonable. You know, sperm counts have, I think, more than halved in the last 50, 60 years. Yeah.
Exactly.
And that is put down, among other things, to your very likely increase estrogens. Even being fat increase your estrogen, circulating estrogens, and a lot of people are
Mhm.
overweight. So yeah, there are a lot of reasons why estrogens are higher in people. Whether that is causing this or not is a question. But it's and it may be partly that, but a lot of it I think is probably groupthink as well. And once one person sort of becomes pathetic, it's permission for other people to become pathetic or something. But uh,
A pathetic stampede.
well, it is, and you can totally understand why people. I worry having kids. You worry about your kids, and you obviously worry about protecting your daughter and that sort of thing, and that's a really
Mhm.
important thing. And there are a lot of bad things out there, and there are things that are much worse now. There are many more children that disappear in the US now, and a lot of that is put down to what happens on the internet and kidnapping children, that sort of thing. And this is a real thing. The police figures are horrific. Most people aren't aware of the number of children who've gone missing and how that's gone up. And a lot of it's put down to the child abuse and the child abuse industry, that sexual
Mm,
abuse industry that makes a lot of money on through not mainstream websites, but through the sort of dark web and so on. So
mm,
you worry about this, and with that you worry about the safety of your children, and I totally
mm,
understand that. But that is a very different thing than you know your kid running in the playground and hurting his arm.
mm.
It's a totally different issue, and you have different fixes for it. So I think maybe they get a little bit conflated as well, and people just you know concerned for the freedom and the life of your child becomes
Mm.
concern that they don't get any insult or harm whatsoever. But I think they're very different things. Our kids now, that they fall over and they cut themselves and
Mhm.
they get up and keep running, and that's because we tell them to. But
Yeah.
and a lot of people think that's bad, but honestly,
No, no.
when we watch it and you see them do that and
Mhm.
hurt themselves significantly and look at the wound and then get up and keep running, you actually there's something there which is sort of in that child which is very different from the ones that just
Yeah, that's right.
fold
The
and wait for
mollycoddled
someone to
one.
come and help them. Yeah. And
Yeah.
life does have its tough times for all of us. And it has times when we're not safe, and is always going to. So they're probably going to fare better in the
Yeah, you
future,
got
I
to be
think,
prepared
because
for
of
that.
that. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was in the Middle East last June on a conference, and I was talking to a woman who's very much safetyism. She was selling that to companies there. And it was the story, well, what do you do with your children and a candle? And I said, nothing. So she said, so you let them learn that
Mm.
the candle is hot by holding their hand above it and it gets burned? I said,
Yeah.
that's exactly right.
Of
That's
course.
exactly what I let them do.
They might do it once. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. And she sort of, don't
Yeah.
go near it. No, 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 no. I'm kind of like, this is a cheap lesson. That candle is not going to do that much damage.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
I know we actually have a mutual acquaintance, I think, who is vilified by certain people in the media for like advocating for child labor. And
Mhm.
what this person actually advocates for is, why can't kids still do a paper run like they used to? Um,
Like my wife used to.
yeah, well, yeah. I grew up working. I drove an 8-ton truck before when I was about 9 or 10, because we on farms. So I used to work
Mhm.
collecting hay and picking potatoes and all the rest of it. And that was what kids did. And
Mhm.
it was really fun. And there was bits of it that were dangerous, but it was mostly not that bad. And that we did that for money, and we got money for it, and we worked hard.
Mhm.
And that it certainly instills in you that. money doesn't come for free and shouldn't, I think.
Hmm. An early lesson.
Yeah, and so yeah, you develop the idea that you do need to work for yourself and support yourself.
Hmm.
Whereas if you never do that and you just
Hmm.
are given money and given food ad infinitum all through your childhood and all through university, then probably you're going to come out of that with a sort of safety is the attitude and with a certainly an attitude that the government owes me, which is very common now,
Mm.
I think. The government owes me a
Well,
living.
I was going to go there next, which is what indeed do you see at the end of what is now the modern education system? Right? Holding
Mm,
up hands, expecting some kind of daddy and mother in the form of a government who's basically
mm,
like a prison guard, right? Preventing you from living
yeah.
really and becoming self-sufficient. But can you tell me some of your experiences? Because you've worked in a lot of big international organizations, and as such, will have been hiring, will have worked with younger people coming out of this system. Have you seen a change over time in what they're good at, what they're bad at, their level of dependency, maybe? And what did you do? I mean, did you stop hiring particular kind of people? What did you see a change, and how did you react to it?
I think there is a change. People take less responsibility um, for what they do, for their work. So they, yeah, I mean, it's hard to put your finger on it because, everyone's different. It's the spectrum moves essentially. But I think in general, people are less willing to take responsibility and um, admit mistakes and sort of own them. So, um, yeah, I mean, I'll change subject for a moment because I think it's relevant, but because, yeah, it's part of this entitlement. And I think the word's overused, but I think people are entitled. They feel entitled to, rather than having to work their and prove their way through their work. They're sort of entitled to a promotion, they're entitled to a bonus, they're entitled to a job. Um, so going back to what you're saying about the government, and I think and this is through my work as well, but the thing where I think we're heading as a society, and it's related to this is the universal basic income idea, and that's going to happen, and governments are going to be giving everyone a bit of money, enough to live off. So it'll be something like in the form of a central bank digital currency. It won't be free
Hmm.
money. And we're already seeing a bit of that. People on social welfare aren't allowed to buy sugary drinks or cigarettes or something. So you're already seeing,
Hmm.
you can see the justification. The income is coming, I think, and it will do that. And um, I think it'll destroy society. Actually, I think it'll be the ultimate in the direction we're going with loss of responsibility and so on, and that leads in the end to a loss of dignity. And you
Mm.
see this in communities that live off universal basic income, and there's many in Australia. And some of for Indigenous communities are an example where many do very well because they have strong leadership and they forego the free money and they actually
Mhm.
set up tourist industries or whatever. And but once you get a whole community living off government money and government welfare, and it happens in, for instance, the western suburbs of Melbourne. I saw it when I was working there as well. People, there's no incentive to work anymore.
Hmm.
And once you stop working, and once, particularly, I think a man stops being able to and feeling the need to provide for a family, then you become depressed. You turn to drugs, alcohol, whatever. Then the man starts beating the wife. You get family violence. The kids get neglected. Then, some examples in Australia where when that happens, then the government starts giving the money directly to the wife because the man
Hmm.
uses it for alcohol. So that, the only role the man had was to collect the check. Now he has absolutely no role whatsoever. So it makes it
Hmm.
worse. And
Hmm.
I think the only way out of that in the end is for people to force themselves back onto their own feet. And once you start working for a living, providing for your family, then your dignity comes back, and you don't need
Hmm.
all the props that you've been using. So
Yeah.
I think I think we're going to see an increase in drug abuse, an increase in alcoholism, an increase in family violence, and all that as we go down that path. And I think it's
Mm.
inevitable that we'll go down that path, and we'll see all this before we fix it.
I think it's very interesting what you say there, right? Which is this entitlement of the young workers, and feeling they don't need to work for it, they don't need to prove themselves, and that
Mm,
this to a certain extent takes something away from people. You take away a challenge, but you also
yeah,
take away their role in life, then, which is to work with that challenge and do their best to overcome it. And
yeah,
particularly for men, they need a role in life. And I totally subscribe to
mm,
that, right? We see this. I'm a well-being guy, right? And we see that
mm,
very strongly in the data. You take away a man's role, they get very depressed, they get
mm,
aggressive, da 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 da. You take away a man's money, it matters much less, right? It's really the
mm,
role thing that
yeah,
matters. They've got something. But I think that this is not well understood by society, that if you take away people's role,
mm,
then as you say, their dignity, their sense of what is their life for, and you are taking
yeah,
away the reason for community, the reason for families, right? And
yeah,
so you get the breakdown of that. I think, to be honest, very few people believe that, right? For instance,
yeah,
I had a friend of mine who said yesterday, we need to have a constitution in which the government provides health and education. And I said, well, if
mm,
the government does that, you're taking away all the roles of the communities. You're destroying them at the stroke of the pen.
yeah,
And this guy is 50. He'd never considered that. He's a smart guy. He sees lots of government abuse.
mm.
But that link, which is take away these roles, these responsibilities, and you're destroying someone. That's kind of like, what do you mean I'm helping them? I'm taking responsibility. No, you're not.
Yeah, and it's well intentioned, but it is a disaster. And the extreme form, I guess, in Australia, as an example, or in the US, was putting native populations on reservations.
Hmm.
And some of that was done just to keep people off the land and steal it, but some of it was done by people who were actually thought they were well intentioned. Because you,
Hmm.
you take them there and they get better food and they don't have hard seasons and their kids get educated and all the rest of it. But of course, yeah, you're taking them away from a very rich and meaningful lifestyle and dumping them there to do nothing all day.
Mm.
And
Sit down money. I've heard this described in
yeah,
Aboriginal culture in
sit down
Australia,
money. Yeah,
that government welfare is sit down money.
yeah, it is. And so, yeah, it's a if you've worked on these communities, you see what works and what doesn't, and
Mhm.
I don't think you can work on them and not be very concerned about the way that society is going because we're all, you know, we're all going to go in that direction, I think.
Well,
Especially, if you believe that
I,
AI is going to destroy a lot of jobs and so on, then we're going to have a lot of redundant people in terms of having to
mhm.
work for society to function.
Yeah, well, I totally agree. But to make the economist argument, a lot of people nowadays have bullshit jobs. And I have
mm,
come to term it unemployment with dignity because they don't realize they're bullshit jobs, but they're making plans for nobody and pretending
mm.
to rule the world or rule their local council. And in a way, it's like sit down money with a pretend purpose. It's probably better than straight down sit down money. At
Well,
least
it is
they're going to
because they
pretend
think they have
something.
a purpose. And yeah, I mean, I see that in my profession. I think a lot of global health work, especially around, pandemic preparedness and climate and health and so on. If you read what is being done, it's completely useless stuff. It
Hmm.
doesn't contribute to health, which is supposedly what public health is for. But so yeah, that is useless money. But the people who are doing it, a lot of them are passionate because they actually believe it's really useful.
Hmm.
So I'm not
Good for them, but
good for them, and but it's better than getting the drugs and alcohol. It's just a pity that someone else has to pay the money because they're all on, most of them are on public money
which
to
makes it
do
in the
it.
long run which makes it in the long run unsustainable, right? I mean,
Yeah, which is why we
the
have two
truth gets found
trillion
out sooner
debt
or
in the
later.
US. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
it does, and in the meantime, I mean that's another thing. The way in the end, I think it will all fall over because, but you're the economist, I'm not, but we have a $2 trillion deficit a year in the US to support the big government that we have,
mhm.
and the nanny state that we have. Britain has proportionately even worse, I think. Europe is going down, its industries are
Mhm.
dying, but its costs are getting higher. So, yeah, I think if you look at the social welfare in most of the EU and in America, if you go forward 20 years, there's absolutely no way that it seems what's the word, the money that the government is required to
Mhm.
pay for pensions and social welfare,
Mhm.
it's not there. It's not going to be there.
Mm.
Their
Well, it
obligations. So the system is going to collapse because you can't have so few people supporting so many.
mhm.
And we're doing it with debt at the moment and just shifting paper around to make it look as if
Well,
someone's
uh,
funding it.
I mean, being the economist, I would say the US is a slightly different model from Europe. In Europe, there's lots of people who have very small jobs, right? They don't earn
Mm,
much, but there's a bit. So there's high labor force participation. America does something else, which is they're basically the international pirates. They force other people to accept the American dollars and they force them
mm,
into the patents and the petrodollar and, the 800 military bases. And that basically pays for the show. So that debt is ultimately not paid by Americans, it's paid by their vassals overseas. That can keep going
mm,
to a long time until it totally collapses, right? But
mm,
then the empire collapses.
mm.
And my reading of history is that an empire collapses only very violently, right? The last phases of empire is that it
Yeah.
really resists this. And you might say that's the phase we're in now, right? Where America is trying to take over South
Yeah,
America
and
and all the
you
rest of
start a
it, right?
few
It's trying to
wars
avoid
to
this.
I mean you're
And
going
you
to
start
need to
losing
control
them.
your population because it's going to be a bit chaotic. So if you start some wars, then you have an excuse to bring in much more draconian controls over your population.
No, no, exactly. Now, I mean, you're a guy who in that sense takes, as it were, responsibility for these kind of things. I mean, as you said, you saw
Well,
things
they're not my
coming in
fault.
Washington State. Well, but you
Yeah,
did. I mean, you said, look, you saw things coming in Washington State, and as a result, you
yeah,
moved before they
yeah,
happened.
yeah, yeah.
So you look forward, you plan. Okay, if you look forward and plan and trust your judgment as to what is happening in this space, the bullshit jobs, as I termed them. Well, I don't want to make it personal. What are your plans for your family? But what would you advise, as it were, people who see this and want a meaningful, dignified life for themselves, their family, some sense of community? What are the options? Are we all going to go to Paraguay, become Mormons, Amish?
Yeah, I don't know. So we moved to Texas in the end because we thought it's not the government or anything like that. I'm not a big fan of the Texas government, but the people have this sort of independent streak, and you really see it. Like, as an example, one of you backs a car out of the garage with the door wide open and pulls the door off, and someone down the road finds another matching door on eBay and installs it 3 days later for the the pump breaks. We out of town. The water pump breaks. I'm away. So 3 people will immediately respond to come around and fix it. So
Mm.
it's that sort of place, and that makes a big difference. If things are becoming chaotic and the economy's collapsing, then you probably want people around you who can look after themselves and each other. So it's a community in a practical sense. And so that is sort of why we ended up here. Because of our jobs, we could have gone anywhere. And we thought other countries and all sorts of things. We thought probably here is about the best for us. There's also, it's near the beach and there's plenty of open space and all that. So it's a good place to live. Um, but yeah, I think, it's difficult because a lot of people have to live in very large cities. Most people live in very large cities. Um, so it's hard in that situation to know what you would do, I think.
Mm. Well, but I mean, you've spent quite a while in, as it were, surely the economic context of large cities, a doctor, which is a
Mm,
profession coming from large cities, and the WHO, which is a metropolis kind of thing. And your wife as well, right? She also worked for those large
mm.
institutions. So in a way, you are both city people who've, as it were, it sounds like you've chosen the most community-oriented place you could find,
Well,
with
we
still
both grew
schools
up
as
in places
prisons.
like this. Yeah, we both grew
Sure.
up in relatively small towns with communities. So
Okay.
that helps, I think. I feel it. Where I am now, I feel like rural Australia. I feel at
Okay.
home. Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I know friends who went to places in Portugal. I know people who went
Mm,
to Paraguay, Mexico, with that
yeah.
same thing in mind. And some of those have been city dwellers their whole lives and sort of, okay, they
Mm,
had a shock coming to them, right? So how
yeah.
is that in a way? I mean, for you, it's back to your roots, but I mean, because I know many city dwellers, what they fear is the interference of the neighbors. They'll tell me, there's this wrong with your kid, and they'll help you with this,
Mm.
but they'll also, as it were, yeah, a real community does, yeah, have an opinion on you and whatever you do. And the,
Well,
is
yeah,
that
it's
too
not.
bad, or is that livable if you're used to it?
No, I mean, it's not that intense here. So, yeah, where I grew up, if I go back to, I grew up in a town of a bit under 1,000 people, which was the biggest town around. And yeah, everyone did know everyone pretty well. And here, it's not quite that close. We're out of town a bit, and people have 2, 3 acres each. So you're not there. The houses aren't on top of each other. Um, So people help if you ask them to help, but they're not in each other's face, I guess. Um, so yeah,
So is
so
that a new form? Yeah, is that a new form of community then, David? In a way,
well, it is, but
a
it's
halfway
not.
house. Yeah.
Yes, but if everyone has 2, 3 acres, then you can't have that many people. Yeah.
Mhm.
So we have this, and we have 3 acre, 3 and a bit acres here, and we have more or less 10 sheep, depending on how hungry we are, and lots of chickens and ducks and geese and that sort of thing, but pigs occasionally. But yeah, that's also, there's nothing romantic about that. It's a lot of work, and the block is swampy, and you're walking around in the rain and the mud, and it stinks a lot of the time. So, and it's hard work, and it does limit your ability to go on holidays a bit. We can find people to help, but so there's pros and cons to trying to be a little bit self-sustaining. We couldn't, we have a lot of our own food. We know what we're eating. We think it's healthier. Eat a lot of eggs, but we wouldn't pretend that we're saving money by doing that. And
Hmm.
we probably break even with the food side because you got to build fences, you got to fix them, you got to buy some feed for the animals, etc. So I think, and we have reasonable salaries, reasonable incomes, not salaries, but reasonable incomes through various sources.
Hmm.
So that allows us to do this, but you're not going to live off a block like this and be able to use what you can do on the block to pay for electricity, pay for your internet, pay
Mm.
for your taxes to keep the roads working, etc. So it's not a way that you can live self-sufficiently.
Mm.
And we used to have goats, and most of them died because of some parasites on the block, and despite our best
Mm.
efforts. And if you're reliant on them, you lose all your fruit
Mm.
trees, or your fruit or whatever, then your chickens die of bird flu, I don't know, then you start again, you got no food. So it's not, that people say you could be self-sustaining. I don't think you can. Not really.
Hmm.
Not long
Mm.
term. If everyone's doing this in a much larger community, it's possible, but you're not going to be going on holidays to, Spain
Mm. So
anymore.
is that the future you see then? Because the situation you sketched for yourself is similar to mine and Erica's and a lot of people we know, which is that we now live more in communities and remote,
Hmm.
but really a lot of our money keeps coming from the city. It keeps coming from that
Yeah.
globalist life, if you like. That's what we were educated for, both you and me.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. So that's
but
how we're living. But I think we're a small, fortunate, tiny minority that can do
exactly,
that.
exactly.
And
So,
and
so what
if
is that
things
future
become
you see?
chaotic, I don't know. Yeah, if things
Yeah.
become chaotic economically and all the rest of it, I don't know what will happen. We're better off here than in the middle of a city. I'm happy with that. So that's partly why we're here.
Hmm.
But and yeah, of course you would give up a lot of the things. If things got really bad, then life would be much simpler. And but again, yeah, you're better off with a few acres in a
Mm.
resilient, independent community than stuck in a
Mm.
city completely dependent on a constant flow of transport from the countryside in order to even eat.
Hmm.
So, so we're better off, but I don't. It's not. I wouldn't pretend that this is the answer to most people.
No, and also if you think of what kind of economy are you educating your kids for,
Mm.
that tells you a little bit what you truly expect. I mean, I presume you are in a way educating them for what? The city, the globalist life? Well, it won't be the farming life, I presume. You won't just be telling them about chickens.
Well, no, but we'll want them to know about them. And I'm not. We're not. I don't think we're educating them for anything really, except I mean, they're
Okay.
young, but they just to do what they want. I don't know what. You're from academia.
Hmm.
Academia is a mess at the moment in the US, I guess in Europe as well. The I know lots of academics who are extremely unhappy with the way things are.
Hmm.
You're trying to do something better for a reason because mainstream
Yep.
academia is what
No,
it
it's a
is.
mess.
I'm not sure that I would want to do medicine now. I've gone off into fields of medicine that are really interesting and great fun to do. But most doctors are sitting in an office following guidelines essentially dictated by a pharmaceutical company. So I wouldn't want to do that. Pediatricians just see kids on well child visits and inject them with things. That's not really a
It's
lifestyle
a
that I'd
dark
want to
place.
follow. Yeah.
It's a dark place. Yep.
So, 50 years ago, you could say, "Oh, I'd love my kid to be a doctor." Um, try to get them interested in it. But now I wouldn't. I would just, and with the AI is obviously going to change things significantly one way or another. And
Well,
so I think in 20 years' time, a lot of the work that we do now will be quite different. So I, I, I think we're just trying to educate them to be fairly independent and fairly tough and to be able to read and like books particularly rather than screens so that if the power goes off, they're not, devastated. So we have a lot of books in the house, and they love reading because it
hmm
lets their imagination sort of run wild, which a screen doesn't, I think. But yeah, so we're trying to train them to be sort of rounded human beings, I guess, so that
Mm.
whatever comes, they can make the best of it.
So you really are, as it were, taking serious a quite dark scenario, right? You said basically people in the city will be stuck because they're so dependent on everything brought in
Mm,
by transport. One doesn't know what the future of work will be because of AI and societal upheavals, and you're doing your best to prepare your kids for almost anything that may come by making them rounded and resilient young
mm.
beings, which is a hedging strategy. So you're also seriously
Well, it's
expecting
also
trouble
what you'd want to
almost.
do anyway, isn't it? I
No,
mean,
no, absolutely. I
yeah,
totally agree. I totally
yeah.
agree. But I mean, for many people, it's sort of like, no, things will be fine. Our way of living will be the same for the next
No, it
500
won't. No,
years.
of course it won't. Yeah,
Exactly, it
no,
won't,
yeah,
right? But
no.
I mean, I mean, if I ask myself, will society completely implode? I think bits of modern society will live on.
Mm,
But I
yeah.
do also think, yeah, there may be big setbacks coming, big wars, big upheavals.
Yeah, I think there will probably, but we might handle it much better than we think. Um, but and humans have been through this over and over and over and over again.
Exactly.
The French went through the revolution, whatever. These, all through history and much of the world now. If you live in the Middle East, this is already happening. Yeah. If you're trying to bring up kids in Syria or in Gaza or in Iraq or whatever, you understand how difficult it's going to be, or Sudan or DRC or a huge, you know, areas of the world. We're fortunate here that we've had a peaceful existence and relative freedom for several decades. So in a way, you're not saying it's something extraordinary. It's sort of going to default to the
Mhm.
norm, which is pretty chaotic.
Yes, but
Um,
I mean, most of the people I know who live in cities, they can't think that way because they've made their entire life investments into a
well, yeah, and
continuation
if
of
they
as
do
it's
think that
now.
way, what are they going to do? If
Exactly.
you can move out and you can find some land and you can live in a community and it's
hmm
worth doing because it's a much nicer life, I think.
Well,
Um,
I
but a
admire
lot
the
of people
fact that you've
can't.
actually you've managed to make your own food and deal with your own animals. I've got acres here, but you know what? I still go to the supermarket, David.
Yeah, well, so do we for a lot of things, but not for
So,
everything.
that's right. So that
Yeah.
was a wonderful interview. Is there anything further you would like to say on this whole topic?
Um, I just it's yeah. I mean, I think things are going to get really bad, but um, there are more important things in life than not dying, if you know what I mean.
I know.
So, um, without being too dark, but the sun's going to keep coming up, and the flowers are going to keep blooming, and people are going to keep talking to each other, and so I think if things do become bad and chaotic, it's not like going to be, you know, dark and horrible all the time. It's just going to be, it's it's going to be very different to now, but people are still going to enjoy each other. So
No, I agree. Humanity will find a way, right?
yeah,
Uh,
exactly.
it's hard to keep us down. Our demise has been exaggerated. I agree with that.
Yes, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much.